My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 25 years old. 2 months ago, I graduated with a business degree and landed what I thought was my dream job at Nexera, a tech sales company that promised rapid growth and unlimited potential. I was eager, ambitious, and ready to prove myself in the corporate world. What I didn't expect was to learn my first brutal lesson about workplace politics over a glass of champagne at a dinner that would change everything. I knew something was wrong the moment CEO Victor Langston raised his glass to toast me and asked the question that made the entire table freeze. I hope that $60,000 bonus helped you settle into your new place. I forced a smile, then glanced at my direct supervisor, Mark Renshaw. What bonus? And just like that, an elegant dinner party became the starting point for a classic revenge story between me, a fresh-faced newcomer, and the man who had been stealing my money. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Victor had personally invited me after hearing about my performance in my first month at Nexera. I had closed a $1.3 million deal with a major client, something that typically took seasoned sales representatives 6 months to achieve. Mark had arranged the dinner at Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, and I felt like I was finally making it in the business world. Victor was exactly what you'd expect from a successful tech CEO, silver-haired, sharp-suited, with the kind of commanding presence that made everyone in the room pay attention when he spoke. He had built Nexera from a small startup into a $100 million company, and being personally recognized by him felt like winning the lottery. Claire has been absolutely exceptional, Mark said, cutting into his perfectly prepared salmon. She's exceeded every expectation we had for a new hire. Mark was in his early 40s, with the kind of polished appearance that screamed middle management success. He wore expensive suits and drove a BMW, and I had looked up to him as a mentor figure during my short time at the company. Victor nodded approvingly. That's exactly why I authorized the additional 5% commission bonus. In my experience, when someone shows this level of potential right out of the gate, you invest in them immediately. He turned to me with a warm smile. I hope that extra $60,000 helped you get settled. I know how expensive it can be starting out in the city. The champagne glass slipped slightly in my hand. $60,000. I'd received my standard commission of $30,000 for the deal, which was already more money than I'd ever seen in my bank account. But an additional $60,000, I'd never heard about any bonus, let alone received one. I'm sorry, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. What bonus exactly? The smile on Victor's face faltered slightly. The additional 5% commission I approved for your exceptional performance. Mark submitted the paperwork weeks ago. He looked between Mark and me, clearly sensing something was amiss. Mark's fork paused halfway to his mouth. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face, panic. Maybe, or calculation. Then his expression smoothed into professional concern. Oh, that bonus, he said with a slight laugh. We're still waiting for accounting to process it. You know how these things can be with payroll timing. I stared at Mark, my mind racing. Weeks ago, the deal had closed 6 weeks prior, and I had received my standard commission within days. Why would a bonus take so much longer to process? Accounting issues. Victor's tone sharpened slightly. I specifically requested expedited processing for Claire's bonus. Has there been some kind of delay? Nothing major, Mark assured him quickly. Just some paperwork complications with the new employee bonus structure. It should be resolved within the next pay period. He turned to me with what I was starting to recognize as a practiced smile. Claire, I'm sorry for the confusion. I should have kept you better informed about the timeline. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. Something about Mark's explanation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation and expensive wine, but my mind kept returning to that moment of panic I had seen in Mark's eyes. After dinner, Victor pulled me aside while Mark was settling the bill. Claire, I want you to know that your success hasn't gone unnoticed at the corporate level. We see real leadership potential in you. He handed me his business card. If you ever have any concerns about anything, and I mean anything, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. I thanked him and tucked the card into my purse, wondering if he had sensed the same tension I felt during our conversation about the bonus. The next few weeks passed without any mention of the missing $60,000. I threw myself into my work, closing 2 more significant deals and earning another $30,000 in commissions. My second month's commission arrived in my bank account exactly on schedule, which only deepened my suspicions about the delayed bonus. Mark continued to act as though nothing had happened, praising my work and talking about my bright future with the company. But I noticed small changes in his behavior. He seemed more watchful around me, and conversations about money or commissions made him visibly uncomfortable. Finally, I decided to investigate on my own. I drafted a carefully worded email to Sarah in accounting, explaining that I wanted to verify the status of a bonus that had been approved several weeks earlier. I kept the tone light and professional, as if it were just a routine inquiry. Sarah's response arrived the next morning and made my blood run cold. "Hi, Claire. I checked our records and see that the $60,000 bonus was processed and deposited on October 15th, exactly 2 weeks after your deal closed. The payment was made to the account on file for the employee of record. Let me know if you need any additional documentation." October 15th. That was 3 weeks ago. The money had been deposited, but not into my account. I read the email 3 times, my hands shaking slightly as the implications sank in. Someone had stolen $60,000 from me, and I had a pretty good idea who. I printed out Sarah's email and walked directly to Mark's office. He was on a phone call, but I waited outside his door until he finished. When he finally waved me in, I could see him trying to read my expression. "Claire, what can I do for you?" His voice was artificially cheerful, the way people sound when they're trying too hard to appear casual. I placed the printed email on his desk without saying a word. Mark glanced down at it, and I watched all the color drain from his face. "What is this?" he asked, but his voice had lost its confidence. "It's confirmation that my $60,000 bonus was processed and deposited 3 weeks ago," I said quietly. "Into someone's account, just not mine." Mark stared at the paper for a long moment, and I could practically see his mind working, trying to figure out how to explain this away. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression that was equal parts anger and desperation. "Claire, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said slowly. "These accounting records aren't always accurate. Sometimes payments get coded incorrectly, or there are delays in processing that don't show up in the system properly." "So you're saying this email is wrong?" I asked. "That the money wasn't actually deposited?" "I'm saying that accounting makes mistakes all the time," Mark replied, his voice starting to rise. "And before you go making accusations based on some clerical error, maybe you should think about how this kind of attitude might affect your career here." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm not making accusations. I'm asking simple questions about money that was supposed to be paid to me." Mark stood up abruptly, his professional mask finally slipping completely. "You want to know what I think? I think you're being greedy. $60,000 on top of everything else you've already earned. Most people would be grateful for the opportunities you've been given here instead of constantly asking for more money." I stared at him in shock. "Greedy? For asking about money that belonged to me?" "Mark, Victor personally told me about this bonus. It's not something I requested or demanded. It was approved compensation for my work." "Victor tells people a lot of things," Mark snapped. "That doesn't mean every casual comment he makes is a binding financial commitment. Maybe you misunderstood what he meant." Now I was getting angry. I didn't misunderstand anything, and according to this email, the money was already processed and paid out. So either accounting made a $60,000 error, or someone received money that should have been mine. Mark's face was red now, and his voice was loud enough that I was sure other people in the office could hear. "You know what, Claire, I've tried to be patient with you, but this entitled attitude is exactly the kind of thing that holds young employees back. Maybe you should focus more on doing your job and less on chasing imaginary bonuses." "It's not imaginary if it was already paid out," I said firmly. "That's enough." Mark slammed his hand on his desk. "This conversation is over. And if I hear that you've been spreading rumors or making unfounded accusations about financial improprieties, there will be serious consequences for your employment here. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. Are you threatening to fire me for asking about my own compensation? I'm telling you to drop this immediately and focus on your actual job responsibilities. Mark said coldly. Consider this your only warning. I walked out of his office feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. The man I had looked up to as a mentor was not only stealing from me, but was now threatening my career to cover it up. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to figure out what to do next. That afternoon, Mark called me back into his office. This time, his demeanor was calm and controlled, which somehow felt more ominous than his earlier outburst. Claire, I've been thinking about our conversation today, he said, settling back in his chair. And I've realized that we may not be the right fit for each other after all. My heart sank. What do you mean? I mean that your performance lately has been concerning. The questioning of company financial procedures, the confrontational attitude, the entitled behavior regarding compensation that may or may not exist. He spread his hands as if the conclusion were obvious. It's clear that you're not adapting well to corporate culture. My performance has been excellent, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. I've exceeded every sales target you've given me. Sales numbers aren't everything, Mark replied smoothly. Cultural fit and professional maturity are equally important. And frankly, today's conversation raised serious questions about both. I realized with growing horror where this was heading. You're firing me. I'm making a business decision that's in the best interests of the company. Mark said, your employment with Nexera will be terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and your personal belongings will be shipped to you. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of a single conversation, I had gone from rising star to unemployed, all because I had asked about money that belonged to me. This is retaliation, I said quietly. You're firing me because I discovered you stole my bonus. Mark's expression didn't change. I'm terminating an employee who demonstrated poor judgment and unprofessional behavior. The fact that you're already making legal threats only confirms that this was the right decision. 20 minutes later, I was standing on the sidewalk outside Nexera's office building with a small box of personal items and no job. The security guard who had escorted me out was polite but firm. I was not to return to the building or attempt to contact any current employees. The next few weeks were the worst of my life. I burned through my savings trying to keep up with rent and expenses while sending out dozens of job applications. Despite my impressive sales record at Nexera, the lack of experience and references made it nearly impossible to find new employment. Most companies wanted candidates with at least 2 years of experience, and the few that were willing to consider recent graduates offered salaries that wouldn't even cover my basic living expenses. To make matters worse, I discovered that Mark had been carefully managing the narrative about my departure. When potential employers called Nexera for references, they were told that I had been terminated for performance issues and was not eligible for rehire. The specifics were vague enough to avoid legal trouble, but damaging enough to torpedo my job prospects. I was 2 weeks behind on rent and down to my last $300 when I saw the advertisement for the Tech Leaders Summit. It was a high-profile conference featuring presentations from top executives in the technology industry. The ticket price was $10,000, which would normally put it completely out of my reach. But one name on the speaker list caught my attention, Victor Langston, CEO of Nexera. According to the conference website, Victor would be delivering a keynote address on ethical leadership in the digital age, followed by a VIP reception where attendees could have direct conversations with the speakers. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I needed a chance to tell Victor the truth about what had happened without Mark's interference. The problem was the $10,000 ticket price. It represented literally everything I had left in the world, plus money I would have to borrow from my credit cards. If this plan didn't work, I would be completely broke and probably homeless within a month. I stared at the conference website for hours, weighing my options. I could use the money to extend my apartment lease for another month and keep looking for work through traditional channels. Or I could bet everything on one last chance to get justice and clear my name. In the end, the decision was easier than I expected. I had nothing left to lose. I purchased the ticket online, using a combination of my remaining savings and a cash advance from my credit card. The transaction went through, and I immediately felt a mixture of terror and determination. I had just spent my last dollar on what was essentially a lottery ticket, but it was the only play I had left. The Tech Leaders Summit was held at the Grand Hyatt in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of luxury hotel where everything from the lobby to the bathrooms screamed exclusivity. I arrived early, wearing the only professional dress I owned that still looked appropriate for such an upscale event. Despite my nerves, I felt a surge of confidence as I walked through the registration area. I belonged here, even if I could no longer afford to be here. Victor's keynote speech was scheduled for the afternoon, so I spent the morning attending other presentations and networking sessions. The conference was filled with successful executives, venture capitalists, and entrepreneurs, exactly the kind of people who could potentially offer me a job if I played my cards right. During the lunch break, I was reviewing the afternoon schedule when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Claire, what the hell are you doing here?" I turned around to find Mark Renshaw staring at me with an expression of pure shock. He looked exactly the same as he had 6 weeks earlier, except now his expensive suit and confident demeanor felt like an insult to everything I had been through. "Hello, Mark," I said calmly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "How did you—" He stopped and looked around nervously, as if afraid someone might overhear us. "How did you afford a ticket to this conference?" "The same way you did, I imagine," I replied, though in my case, it required spending money I actually earned. Mark's face went red, but he quickly moved closer and lowered his voice. "Listen, Claire, I don't know what you think you're doing here, but you need to leave, now. Actually, I paid $10,000 for this ticket, so I think I'll stay for the full conference," I said. "Unless you'd like to reimburse me for the cost." "This is insane," Mark hissed. "You're unemployed and broke, and you spent 10 grand on a conference ticket. What kind of financial decision is that?" "The kind made by someone who has nothing left to lose," I replied quietly. Mark stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating the implications of my presence at the conference. Finally, he pulled out his checkbook. "Fine," he said. "I'll buy your ticket from you. 15,000, that's a 50% profit on your investment, and you can walk away from this whole situation." I shook my head. "Not interested." 20,000, Mark said quickly. "That's double what you paid. Take the money and go home. Claire." "No." Mark's composure was starting to crack. "You're making a huge mistake. Do you have any idea what kind of people are at this conference? These are serious business leaders, not the place for whatever amateur revenge fantasy you're cooking up." "I guess we'll find out," I said, and walked away. Victor's keynote speech was everything I had hoped it would be. He spoke passionately about the importance of ethical leadership, corporate transparency, and creating workplace cultures built on trust and fairness. The irony of listening to these principles while knowing that one of his own managers was systematically stealing from employees was almost overwhelming. After the speech, there was a brief break before the VIP reception. I used the time to review my strategy one more time. I had copies of all the relevant emails, documentation of my sales performance, and a clear timeline of events. Everything I needed to present a compelling case. The VIP reception was held in an elegant ballroom adjacent to the main conference hall. About 50 people mingled over cocktails and appetizers, having informal conversations with the conference speakers. Victor was surrounded by a small group of admirers, but the setting was relaxed enough that I would eventually get my chance to speak with him. I was waiting for the right moment when Mark appeared at my elbow again, looking more agitated than I had ever seen him. "Last chance, Claire," he whispered urgently. $30,000, cash, right now. Just walk away from this." 30,000. I raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting. Yesterday you were claiming my $60,000 bonus didn't exist, but you're willing to pay half that amount just to keep me from talking to Victor." "That's not what this is about," Mark said, but his denial lacked conviction. Then what is it about? I asked. If you haven't done anything wrong, what are you so afraid of? Mark didn't answer, but the desperation in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. The perfect opportunity came when Victor stepped away from his conversation group to refresh his drink at the bar. I approached him with what I hoped was a confident smile. Mr. Langston, I'm Claire Bennett. We met at dinner several weeks ago. Victor's face lit up with recognition. Claire. Of course, how wonderful to see you here. How are things going at Nexaracor? Actually, that's something I'd like to discuss with you. I said, I'm no longer with the company, and there were some circumstances around my departure that I think you should be aware of. Victor's expression grew more serious. I see. What kind of circumstances? I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment everything would either come together or fall apart completely. Do you remember that dinner when you asked me about the $60,000 bonus you had approved? I asked. Of course, Victor nodded. Mark mentioned there were some processing delays. There weren't any processing delays, I said quietly. The money was processed and deposited exactly when it should have been, just not into my account. Victor stared at me for a moment, and I could see him processing the implications of what I was saying. Are you telling me that someone else received your bonus? I'm telling you that when I asked Mark about it, he threatened my job and then fired me the same day. I said, I have documentation of everything, if you'd like to see it. The noise of the reception seemed to fade around us as Victor focused entirely on our conversation. Show me, he said simply. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared and handed it to Victor. Inside were copies of Sarah's email confirming the bonus payment, printouts of my sales records, and a detailed timeline of my conversations with Mark. Victor read through everything carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. This is extraordinary, he said finally. You're alleging that Mark intercepted a bonus payment and then terminated your employment to prevent you from reporting the theft. I'm not alleging anything, I replied. I'm showing you documented evidence of what happened. Victor looked up from the papers and studied my face. Why didn't you contact me immediately when this happened? I gave you my card specifically for situations like this. I was afraid, I admitted. Mark made it clear that questioning company financial procedures would be considered insubordination. And after he fired me, I wasn't sure anyone would believe a terminated employee over a senior manager. So you spent $10,000 on a conference ticket to get 5 minutes of my time, Victor said thoughtfully. It was the only way I could think of to reach you without going through company channels that Mark controls. I said. Victor nodded slowly, then closed the folder and handed it back to me. Claire, I want you to know that if these allegations are true, Nexaracor will take immediate and decisive action. What you're describing isn't just theft. It's a fundamental violation of everything we stand for as a company. I understand, I said. I just wanted you to know the truth. I'm going to ask you to do something that might seem unusual. Victor continued. I want you to come to our corporate offices tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Don't go to the regular Nexaracor building, come to our executive headquarters on Park Avenue. Ask for my assistant, Margaret, and tell her I've requested an immediate internal investigation meeting. I felt a surge of hope mixed with nervousness. What kind of meeting? The kind where we get to the bottom of this situation once and for all. Victor said grimly, and if what you're telling me is true, the kind where we make sure justice is served. The next morning, I stood outside the gleaming corporate headquarters of Nexaracor, wearing the same professional dress I'd worn to the conference. The building was even more impressive than the regular office where I'd worked, all glass and steel, reaching up into the Manhattan sky like a monument to corporate success. Margaret, Victor's assistant, was expecting me and immediately ushered me into a conference room where Victor was waiting with 2 other people I didn't recognize. Claire, thank you for coming, Victor said, standing to shake my hand. I'd like you to meet Jennifer Walsh, our head of internal audit, and David Kim, our corporate counsel. My stomach dropped slightly at the mention of corporate counsel. This was more serious than I had expected. Please, have a seat, Jennifer said kindly. We've reviewed the documentation you provided to Mr. Langston, and we'd like to hear your account of the events in your own words. For the next hour, I walked them through everything that had happened, from the dinner conversation to my termination. Jennifer took detailed notes while David asked pointed questions about dates, dollar amounts, and my interactions with Mark. They were thorough but not hostile, and I began to feel like they were taking my allegations seriously. Based on what you've told us, we're going to initiate a formal internal investigation, Jennifer said when I finished my account. This will involve reviewing all financial records related to your employment, interviewing relevant personnel, and conducting a comprehensive audit of Mark's management of commission and bonus payments. How long will that take? I asked. Given the serious nature of these allegations, we'll prioritize the investigation. David replied, We should have preliminary findings within a week. Victor leaned forward. Claire, I want to be clear about something. If our investigation confirms what you've told us, Nexaracor will not only make you whole financially, but will also ensure that appropriate consequences are applied to anyone involved in wrongdoing. What if the investigation doesn't confirm my account? I asked. Then we'll have learned something important about our internal processes and can make improvements to prevent similar misunderstandings in the future, Victor said diplomatically. I left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. For the first time in weeks, I felt like someone with real authority was taking my situation seriously. But I also knew that corporate investigations could be complicated, and there was no guarantee that the outcome would be what I hoped for. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I checked my email obsessively, waiting for updates that never came. I continued sending out job applications, but my heart wasn't really in it. Everything depended on the results of Nexaracor's investigation. Finally, on Friday afternoon, I received a call from Margaret asking me to come in for a meeting the following Monday morning. She wouldn't give me any details over the phone, which made it impossible to read whether the news would be good or bad. Monday morning found me back in the same conference room, facing the same panel of Victor, Jennifer, and David. But this time, the atmosphere felt different, more formal, more decisive. Claire, thank you for your patience during our investigation, Jennifer began. I'm pleased to tell you that our findings strongly support your account of the events. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, followed immediately by a surge of vindication. Our audit revealed that Mark Renshaw has been systematically intercepting bonus payments intended for sales representatives under his supervision. Jennifer continued. Over the past 3 years, we've identified approximately $400,000 in misdirected payments. $400,000. I felt dizzy thinking about how many employees had been affected by Mark's theft. In your specific case, David said, pulling out a file. We confirmed that a $60,000 bonus was approved by Mr. Langston, processed by accounting, and deposited into an account controlled by Mark Renshaw. The payment was made on October 15th, exactly as indicated in the email you received from accounting. What happens now? I asked. Several things, Victor said. First, you will receive the full $60,000 that was stolen from you, plus an additional $20,000 in compensatory damages for the hardship you experienced as a result of your wrongful termination. I could barely believe what I was hearing. $80,000 would not only solve my immediate financial problems, but would give me a foundation to rebuild my career. Second, Victor continued, we would like to offer you a position at our corporate headquarters. Based on your sales performance and the way you handled this difficult situation, we believe you have significant potential for leadership within our organization. What kind of position? I asked. Senior sales representative, reporting directly to our vice president of sales. Jennifer said, the salary would be 25% higher than what you were earning in your previous role, plus enhanced commission structures and comprehensive benefits. It was more than I had dared to hope for. Not only was I being vindicated, but I was being offered a better job than the one I had lost. What about Mark? I asked. Victor's expression hardened. Mark Renshaw's employment with Nexaracor has been terminated, and we are pursuing both civil and criminal remedies for his theft, He will also be required to make full restitution to all affected employees. Will this affect his ability to find work elsewhere? I asked. Given the serious nature of his actions, we will be providing accurate references to any potential employers who inquire. David said diplomatically, "We believe other companies have a right to know about documented financial misconduct." I accepted the job offer immediately, and within 2 weeks, I was working on the 32nd floor of Nexeracor's corporate headquarters. My new role involved managing relationships with the company's largest clients, and the enhanced commission structure meant that a single deal could earn me more than I had made in 6 months at my previous job. But more than the money or the prestigious office, what I valued most was the respect I had earned from Victor and the executive team. They had listened to me when it would have been easier to ignore my allegations, and they had taken decisive action when the investigation confirmed the truth. 6 months later, Victor asked me to lead a new mentorship program for young employees across all of Nexeracor's divisions. The program was designed to ensure that junior staff members had direct access to senior leadership and clear channels for reporting concerns about workplace issues. "I want you to be the face of this program," Victor told me during our planning meeting. "Your experience demonstrates exactly why these protections are necessary, and your success since joining our team shows what's possible when employees are supported properly." The mentorship program launched with great fanfare, and I found myself speaking at industry conferences about the importance of ethical leadership and transparent corporate cultures. It was surreal to think that just a year earlier, I had been unemployed and desperate, while now I was being invited to share my insights with other business leaders. During one particularly memorable presentation at a national conference, I spoke about the importance of integrity in the workplace. When we create cultures where employees are afraid to ask questions or raise concerns, we're not protecting our companies, I told the audience. We're creating environments where problems can fester and grow until they become crises. After my presentation, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm dealing with something similar at my company, and I was afraid to speak up. Your story gave me the courage to do what's right." That conversation reminded me why I had fought so hard for justice in the first place. It wasn't just about the money I'd been owed. It was about the principle that employees deserve to be treated fairly and honestly, regardless of their position or experience level. 2 years after the conference where I had confronted Victor about my stolen bonus, I received an unexpected invitation to lunch. Victor was approaching retirement, and he wanted to discuss the future leadership of Nexeracor. "I've been watching your development very closely," he told me over lunch at the same restaurant where my ordeal had begun. "The way you've grown into your role, the leadership you've shown with the mentorship program, and the respect you've earned throughout the organization, it's all been remarkable." "Thank you," I said, unsure where the conversation was heading. "I'm going to be announcing my retirement plans soon," Victor continued. "And the board will need to identify candidates for succession planning. I want you to know that you're being considered for accelerated leadership development that could put you on track for senior executive roles." I was speechless. 2 years earlier, I had been a desperate, unemployed graduate student betting my last dollars on a chance encounter. Now I was being positioned as a potential future leader of a major corporation. "I know it might seem fast," Victor said, reading my expression. "But the qualities that drove you to fight for what was right, integrity, determination, courage, those are exactly the qualities we need in our future leaders." As I walked back to my office that afternoon, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me to this point. The young woman who had stood in Mark's office demanding answers about her stolen bonus had grown into someone who could help shape the future of an entire company. I thought about Mark occasionally, wondering what had become of him after his termination and legal troubles. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a sense that justice had been served and that other employees were now protected from similar exploitation. The story that had begun with a simple question about a missing bonus had evolved into something much larger, a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that the lessons I'd learned during those difficult months would guide me for the rest of my career. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight not for ourselves, but for the principle that everyone deserves to be treated with honesty and respect. And sometimes, if we're willing to risk everything for what we believe in, the universe has a way of rewarding that courage in ways we never could have imagined.